As per my introduction, that's the dream, if you like. The reality, I guess, is all about connection, and one person in agriculture who's more than eminently qualified to talk about that is Sue McCluskey, who I'm sure is known to many of you, but here she's speaking in her role as a panel member of the Regional Telecommunications Independent Review Committee, which has just handed its report to the government. Sue was the CEO of both Regional Australia Institute and the Council of Rural Research and Development Corporations in the past. She's also been an Executive Director of the Office of Best Practice Regulation, was a Consultant Advisor to the Department of Industry, Tourism and Resources, and held senior policy positions with the Business Council of Australia, the National Farmers Federation and the Australian Taxation Office. She was also a panel member on the recent competition policy review, the Harper Review, and in her spare time is also a beef cattle farmer. So in her role as a member of the Regional Telecommunications Independent Review Committee, Sue is going to talk to us today about what is the situation in relation to access to these sorts of technologies for rural and regional Australia. Please welcome Sue.
Thanks, Mick, and I'm very happy to be here and pleased to see that we have still quite a number of people here. It's going to be interesting following up from Dave's presentation, because I think it's true that the reality is that connectivity is the fundamental enabler, and we just don't have that connectivity. One of the really nice things about being on an independent review, and I've been on two in the last 12 to 18 months, is that you don't have to speak for the government. And what we've been able to do is be able to come out and actually say, and quite clearly articulate what have been the challenges around telecommunications, and put forward some of the recommendations that actually start to look at that reality. And the reality is that we're a very big country and we have a lot of remote areas, and that it is just not feasible to get what we have in the city out in some of those rural and regional areas. And it's one thing that we wanted to make quite clear when we put forward our report was, let's not set up that dream and the expectation that everyone's going to have what you have in the city. But let's look at what we can do to get as close to it as possible to enable the sort of technologies and access to them that Dave was talking about. Look, this was a short review. It was a 3-month review. We did complete our report, and it was actually tabled in Parliament 2 weeks ago. There were 4 of us on the committee. Dina Schiff is a former Telstra executive. She was the chair. Robin Eckermann, who I know David had actually referred to, has done a lot of work on the technical side. Myself, and of course many of you would know Georgie Somerset, who's a beef cattle farmer in Queensland. The report is available online, and if you want a nice hard copy, just let me know. We did release an issues paper. We got 426 submissions. And a lot of those submissions actually gave us the examples, some of which David was talking about, that really started to hone in on the opportunities that exist and what a clear barrier telecommunications is at the moment. We did do public webinars, quite amusing of course, when you think that a whole lot of people are just not connected. Interestingly, it was the people in the regional areas that had the biggest challenge. We had a farmer join us from Meekatharra out in WA who had the best connectivity in a webinar, and we asked why, and she said, well, there's a mine up the road, and I've been able to tap into their Wi-Fi. And you'll see as I go through that fixed Wi-Fi is something that we have really focused on. So the key findings, not surprisingly, were, and you know, given that this review is done every 3 years, moving from the last review that focused very much on mobile, increases in e-commerce. Of course, you know, people are doing more of their banking, government services are moving people on to electronic communications. I had to ring the tax office 2 weeks ago to say, I can't lodge my BAS, can you send me a paper one? Because they hadn't sent a paper one. Virtual delivery of essential services, of course, particularly around health and education, the Internet of Things, the tools we've just seen, and increasing online social and entertainment, the ability to Skype and stay in touch with family and friends. What we saw, though, was where telecommunications is able to provide greater access to business opportunities, fantastic business opportunities, those government services, education, health, emergency services was an area that we did focus on, and remote Indigenous communities was another area that we looked at, because in actual fact, remote Indigenous communities have completely bypassed PCs. They've gone straight to mobile. So to think that we actually need to put in broadband access there, it's more about can we put in Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi hotspots that's really the key. We still do have a growing preference for mobile services, and this is more so for people in regional areas than in metropolitan areas. The Mobile Black Spot program was actually announced while we were undertaking this review, and a second tranche has been announced. The government put in about 100 million, and that's been batched by different states. But as you've heard, a lot of those black spots really relate to provider black spots, not user black spots. As part of the public consultations, we did have a number of people say to us, why can't we actually have a tower on our farm, because we just don't have any connectivity. It's fine if you're in the house, but once you get outside the house, you just don't have it on the farm. The reality is we recognised that the funding was not going to go to be able to do that in many circumstances. So we had to look at what were more innovative ways of being able to get connectivity to those properties. So what we looked at was co-investment models. And that was really targeting the development in uneconomic areas. So those areas off the major highways, those areas where they are certainly more remote, where even if you had 20 rounds of a mobile black spot program funding, you were not going to get a tower put in. We looked at the ability to share infrastructure and the fact that you could actually use public safety wireless networks that could deliver mobile. So when you look at upgrading the existing public safety network, is there an ability to allow access to mobile? There is existing infrastructure right across the country, and we are not actually making the best use of that. So we said that is really a key thing here. We also said that you need to incorporate telecommunications as part of grant funding. So if you're actually providing grant funding for infrastructure, to put in a pipeline, to put in a road, then you should actually mandate the fact that telecommunications should be part of that. Otherwise, you won't get the grant. If you're going to go to all the trouble of digging that hole or digging that line, put in the telecommunications for it. We're starting to see it with greenfields developments, but it's certainly something that needs to be considered as essential if we regard telecommunications as being fundamental to what we need to do. And we've said that you've got to be able to collect and make available the data, the infrastructure data, including utilities. So what we heard from a lot of providers as well as other infrastructure companies was they just did not know where the infrastructure existed to be able to leverage off that. So where you might have gas lines, for example, that information is not necessarily available. So if someone else is going in to put in a pipeline, can they actually leverage off it? If someone else is going in to put in, to bid for a mobile tower, do they know what is the infrastructure there that they can leverage off that? So we've actually said Infrastructure Australia should make that data available and be able to encourage the sharing of that infrastructure. Then we looked at broadband, and look, there was a lot of concern about the broadband, primarily coming from the issues that so many people have experienced from the interim satellite. There's been huge challenges. Those people who were up on it first thought it was absolutely fantastic. But as you got more and more people onto it, they had less access to data, and they were constantly being shaken down by their providers. And so that was probably the significant amount of complaints that we got. We hear a lot, particularly in metropolitan areas, about the NBN and fibre to the premises, fibre to the node. That wasn't our issue in terms of regional telecommunication. We focused on the 8%, which is fixed wireless and satellite. And one of the things we looked at in particular was that you've actually got a lot of people in outer metropolitan areas that are using the satellite. So Adelaide Hills, a lot of those wineries up there, they're using the satellite because it's what's been offered to them as part of their package. And they actually have access to that at far cheaper prices than what people in regional areas would have. And so we said, no, where you have options for other mechanisms, that's what should be provided first, because the satellite needs to be the last point of resort, basically, and it really should be for that last 2 to 3%, and it should be focused on that because they have no other option. And we've really got to look at that fixed wireless and how we can increase the fixed wireless. That's a comparison of just some of the plans you'll see. So someone in a fixed wireless NBN in a metropolitan area is probably paying $69. Once you get to satellite, $369. So there is a huge difference. And it is a particular problem when you've got people in those regional and rural areas that are paying that amount of money and then find out that they're being shaped. And that is a serious consideration for, in particular, education. The number of people that, we had examples of school students can't do their homework because homework is delivered through the internet. University students can't actually submit the assignments and things like that because they just don't have the access to that. So you've got people having to drive into town, if they can, just to be able to lodge and keep doing their day-to-day activities. Not being able to do your banking, or, the classic case where you try to do your banking and the bank will send the verification number by text to your mobile phone. Well, if you've got problems with connectivity, you can't even get that to be able to do your banking. So it's something that we've really got to look to make sure we can fix. For wireless and satellite, we actually said that the NBN, and look, most of these recommendations are directed clearly at the NBN, and it's fair to say that we were politely critical of them. They need to extend the boundaries of fixed wireless because we really see that fixed wireless is a potential solution for a lot of areas, and you're able to put in the fixed wireless and be able to give access. So remote Aboriginal communities, as I said, or even remote communities could have a fixed wireless there, and that would actually work for them and would actually help, particularly with that mobile access. We said that the NBN has to actively manage demand. So at the moment you haven't got that management of demand. So you've got people who actually have the needs and you have others who actually have access to the satellite, and it's just not able to be managed properly. They need to prioritise the traffic and support caching. Now, caching is a way that you can actually allow downloads of information that you can store without needing to be connected. So Netflix is an example. In Canada, they actually allow you free of charge at off-peak times to download certain movies or TV programs, store it on go through a router, be able to store it, and you can access it at different times, which means you're not needing to be live. That is the way that we can actually manage some of that traffic, because once you start to download videos, you take up a huge amount of space, and of course if you've got a whole lot of people that are doing that at the same time, someone can't get on and do their banking. So that's the sort of thing that we've recommended that the NBN look at. We've also said that the NBN needs to look at the fair use policy. Now, the fair use policy, what it does is it actually says that you need to have, as soon as you get to a particular threshold in terms of your use, you can't get any more access. And we've said that is just not feasible. When you look at people in regional areas, it doesn't even recognise things such as how people run their businesses when that's the only access they have is to that satellite. So we've said you've actually got to look at that fair use policy and make sure that you don't detrimentally shape people down or suspend their use, which is currently what's happening. We've also, as part of that recommendation, said that there should be certain exemptions, and those exemptions should be things such as education and health, so that you've got school students that are doing their homework, that doesn't actually impact on your monthly data allowance that then ends up meaning that you get shaped. We've also said that data needs to be provided to enable a customer to monitor how much data they're using. So at the moment they don't have that, and what ends up happening is they go over the limit and they end up not having access. They ring up their provider and their provider will say, well, you've gone over your limit and you're not going to be able to use anything for the rest of the month. Businesses just can't operate like that. So we've said that's got to change, and NBN has to allow that monitoring to happen so people can keep an eye on that. And we've said there's got to be better leverage of investment in the NBN. So there's a lot of money that has been put into the NBN. There's not a lot of information about where their towers are. There's not the opportunity to allow for backhaul or sharing of towers, and that does need to be provided so we get more efficient use of that government dollar. We also had some really good examples of non-broadband type applications. So, and this is particularly in the areas of agribusiness. So these sort of specialised applications, they don't use broadband, they use something called narrowband. And we're saying there should be opportunities for innovative providers to be able to supply these and make them available on farms. So the sort of things that David was talking about could actually be provided on more remote farms where you don't have access that you have at the moment. And once again, being able to utilise this narrowband technology is something that we see that government really needs to consider for those areas that are outside of what would normally be funded as part of TOWs. Mining sectors are already using it, and we're certainly seeing it in some of the big farming and pastoral operations. It's how we can actually leverage off that technology and make it available to more people. Consumer safeguards was the other area we looked at. Consumer safeguards really relate to the service and delivery standards. What happens is that you actually have an obligation to meet certain services, and those consumer safeguards make sure that if you actually get your service interruptions, that you can be compensated for that. And of course, when we look at rural and regional Australia, natural disasters is a real key thing. You have infrastructure problems. In fact, as we found out, there is never a day that goes by where there is not some part of Australia that isn't down for some reason or other in terms of the infrastructure. So this has become a key problem, and of course we don't have necessarily a very competitive telecommunication market once you get outside of the metropolitan areas. So what we've actually done in relation to consumer safeguards is we've put in a number of recommendations that have actually said we need to change the whole universal service obligation. Now, the universal service obligation costs us as taxpayers an awful lot of money. The government puts in quite a lot of money, the telecommunications industry is levied and they put in money. That goes into a bucket, and what it does is it supports a standard telephone service. Now, of course, as was pointed out to us very clearly, there's not a lot of people that are completely relying on a standard telephone service anymore. They have increasingly gone to mobile. That fund also supports payphones, it supports emergency call services and the National Relay Service, which is really for disability. So what we've said is that doesn't work now. It's really increasingly irrelevant in terms of your standard phone. We need to move to a future universal service obligation, which is about mobile and data as well, and that has to be part of that. And we need to actually move to a fund that can actually support where there is no other provider that's going to come in. So that's where you get your thin markets in your rural and remote areas to make sure there is coverage. We can't cut that off completely because there are people that are still in some of those remote areas that completely rely on a standard telephone service. And of course, for emergency services, we do need to make sure that people can be connected. Improving information was the last area that we looked at in terms of our recommendations. Once again, we sort of, had a bit of a go at the NBN here because so many people told us they had no idea when they were going to get the NBN come to them, whatever that meant. They didn't know whether that meant satellite, whether that meant fibre to the node, or what it meant. And there wasn't any way that people were able to not only get that information, but were able to work out what would be the best package and use of that information for them. So we've actually said that there's got to be better tools provided to consumers to help them make informed decisions about what sort of packages they'll take up. We said that the government and NBN needs to provide better information on the timing of the rollout and the range of technologies. I think you could go into the website and it would pull you up a general map. It wouldn't actually tell you when you were going to get connectivity. And then finally, our last recommendation actually related to the fact that regional telecommunications reviews undertaken every 3 years. We said, can there be a better way of doing this? We said if the government actually collected and reported annually benchmark data, and like anything, when it comes to regional Australia, there's a paucity of data on regional telecommunications. If you actually could report that annually and develop a benchmark on the availability and affordability, then you would actually have better information to inform either future reviews, or you could have less frequent reviews because you would have mechanisms in place to show you where the priorities need to be. So, Mick, I think you were right. The reality is our telecommunications infrastructure isn't even close, once you get outside of the metropolitan centres, to be able to meet the sort of dream that David's talking about. What we've got to look at is how we can move much more closely to being able to make that available for people. And one of the important things will be having the examples of where businesses just can't function, and we certainly got a number of those, but if we've got businesses that can't function if you move out of metropolitan areas, then what does that mean for the ag sector if they can't even move into the 21st century and operate globally when telecommunications infrastructure is just such a burden? Thank you.